And we're started. Hooray!
Hello and welcome.
First, before we get started, how many people have come to this panel before? So you kind of have an idea of what's going on. We have changed it up a bit. We're no longer showing the Idea Channel video, and I would like to take a moment, a moment of silence for Idea Channel, which closed last month. So thank you.
Thank you, Idea Channel, for everything.
Thank you, Idea Channel, for doing my work for me. We are Southern Hospitality Cosplay.
Well,
Three quarters
Three
of
quarters of it,
it.
because the other one is working on cosplay staff, and she's going to be emceeing the show. So you guys give all your support to Nini Valentine, who's really awesome. She's not here for the panel, but she's here in spirit.
I just hope she doesn't nail my head high to the wall this time.
She might. Don't test her. She has a wrath. Anyways, bless her super talented heart, her big gay heart. So, round of introductions before we begin. We are Southern Hospitality Cosplay. I am Dean Modern.
And Nicholas Creed.
and I'm Baby Blue Friday.
And we're all a little gay.
Yeah, a little bit.
And this is a panel on LGBT representation in anime and manga. We're basically going to be defining our terms for what defines representation. We're going to be analyzing a bit of the history of queer media in Japan. There are other panels that are also doing that this year, but they go in a little bit more in depth on specific subjects. And I actually encourage you to go to all of them, because the people running them are very cool and they will give you even more information. But we're going to give you a little general idea going in, so maybe you might even go to those panels a little more educated. Anyways, what is representation and what is LGBT? How many people here do not know what the initials LGBT stand for?
Good.
Okay, I'm not explaining that part. Because believe it or not, I have had to.
That's not a problem, it's just some people don't know.
In 2017. Anyway. In its most basic form, media representation is the inclusion, depiction, and otherwise presentation of any demographic in media, fictional or otherwise. Representation as a process works in a trinity of sub-processes known as production, reference, and reception. And I don't know how clearly you can see that image, but it kind of basically explains how the triangle works. No one part starts the triangle, but they must all exist for it to be considered representation. And it boils down to what demographics are included, how they are portrayed, and how the audience reacts or is intended to react to it. We're going to talk a bit about, and this is something we didn't talk about in earlier forms of the panel, but I feel like it's worth bringing up now because especially it's a little more confusing about how to detail this out, about representation versus what is exploitation. Queer exploitation is another term you might have heard. Exploitation in this sense is when media tries to succeed financially by exploiting a current trend, a niche genre, or a lurid subject matter. In relevant terms, exploiting homosexual relationships in order to sell the product as sexual fantasy. Exploitation of LGBT identity in media is the use or portrayal of LGBT sex or identity to increase the appeal of media or product to the detriment of or without regard to the interest of LGBT persons. It's not made for us, it is intended for the titillation of a straight and or cisgender audience. I hate to pick on Katy Perry there, but she's one of the biggest examples in the West I can think of that does this regularly. Poor girl. I'm going to have some examples of exploitation in anime. Mikagura's School Suite's lead character, Erumi Ichinomiya, is clearly a lesbian. However, she is also a modern example of the exploitative lesbian predator trope. Her behavior is almost identical to that of the affable pervert trope seen in male harem protagonists, most famously in the anime Golden Boy, if you're familiar with that film. Which I actually enjoy Golden Boy, so don't take this as being like, this show is bad and it should feel bad. It's just, it's not representation, it's exploitation. Sometimes exploitation is okay in small doses. Anyway, she and her lesbianism do not exist to represent real lesbian, but rather exist to foster the sexual fantasies of the intended male audience. Valkyrie Drive is another example. Valkyrie Drive is a multimedia franchise where through sci-fi plot reasons that are really terrible and badly explained, girls are able to transform into weapons when aroused and whelmed by other women in battle. You heard that, right? Well, this series has a lot of the rules of Yuri, including the rose and candy archetypes, which we'll explain later. The theme of the franchise is sexual exploitation and the use of lesbianism as titillation for its intended straight male audience. And in the video game, the main couple is an incestuous relationship between sisters, so, that's a thing. New game, as another good example, is a manga anime that is ostensibly about an all-women game development staff. In reality, in all blunt honesty, it's typical otaku-based series, moe-style character designs, heavy fan service, and emphasis on cute girls doing cute things together. It's another common form of exploitation. Once you start to recognize this, you'll see it in a lot of series. I hate to pick on it again, but Love Live is another example of a series that does this. Now, there's more sincerity in Love Live than in this series, but it's still a bit of a who is this for kind of situation, and it's good to ask those questions of yourself. Anytime you're reading something and you feel like you're not reacting to it the way they're intending you to react to it, you need to measure, am I the audience? Who is this for? Like, ask these questions because it actually helps you understand what you're watching better. And you might even find yourself enjoying it more despite the fact that it can be considered exploitation.
Yeah, we're not saying you can't enjoy these things. It's like, you just have to kind of consider, like, think about the media you're consuming, basically.
Love Live in particular has a lot of queer fans around the world. I mean, if that's what does it for them, who are we to say it's bad?
Exactly. It's
just, from an analytical perspective, it doesn't really count as what we're qualifying as representation. So. And here's been a popular topic lately. How many of you guys are familiar with the term queer baiting? How many of you have at least heard it before? That's a surprisingly small number. Mostly I must not be on Twitter. To give a definition, queer baiting is the practice, mainly in film and television writing, to hint at, but then not actually depict, a potential same-sex romantic relationship between fictional characters. Traditionally, this has been intentionally done to draw in queer audiences in the West. Now, I want to make that clear, because if you ask some people what queer baiting is, they'll point at Supernatural as an example. That is not what queer baiting is. They're not doing that teasing of male-male relationships to entertain gay male fans of the show, or even gay female fans. They're doing it for straight women's fantasies. That is not queer baiting. It is a type of bait. It is using queer content, but queer baiting is baiting queers, not using queers as bait. Does that make any sense? Okay.
Okay.
Which is why we bring up how it's different in anime, because in anime there is no, in Japan there isn't really considered a strong, I guess you could call a queer demographic to target any sort of media towards. It isn't to say queer people don't exist in Japan, they don't digest media, but from the large part, media as an entity in Japan doesn't recognize gay people as a demographic to be targeted for in mainstream media. And if that content exists, it just goes back to being plain old exploitation, or playing on your expectations to get a reaction out of you, usually out of intended straight audience. And it's hard to tell sometimes what is intended and what is accident, or what could be a genuine, sincere attempt at representation. The two anime I have an example in there is Kyoto Animation, two from Kyoto. Oh, I didn't even realize I was putting this together. They're both from the same studio. Shame on you, Kyoto Animation. That's Sound Euphonium and Free, which I'm assuming most of you have heard of Free. You've probably heard discourse about Free. This is basically what a lot of it boils down to. Like, is this just titillation, or is this an actual legitimate intent of doing something? We don't know. I'm not going to ask the questions. Anyways, a relatively brief history of queer media in Japan. Queer fiction existed in Japan for some time, a long time, a very, very long time, like centuries worth of time. Especially in the Edo period, there was a lot of novels and artwork depicting homosexual relationships. There was a very romanticized version of the regular practice among samurai of, and I hate using this word because it's so loaded, because these were usually consensual relationships, but pedestry, where they would take their young junior as a lover, because that was considered more pure than having a woman. So there's some sexism involved.
Japan was weird.
Yeah, imagine you're so misogynistic you refuse to have romantic relationships with women. Yeah, I'm just saying, man, maybe you need to examine yourself. Anyway, in terms of the modern era, gay manga didn't really become a thing until the late 60s, early 70s. The first widely recognized gay magazine in Japan is Adonis, which was published in the 50s, and it was largely traded by hand. It wasn't sold in stores. It would usually be passed around in the usual, I guess you'd call them gay hangout scenes, bars, bathhouses, anything where the lowdown was going down. You know what I'm talking about. It's difficult to explain to people today how discreet and yet
Not at all.
not at all gay culture. And it was kind of a worldwide
Yeah,
thing. How
because
gay culture was in the 50s and
Zines,
60s.
gay zines were traded in the same period in America as well.
Um,
History of those are neat.
It wasn't until Barazoku came along in the 60s that sexual identity became expressed in manga form. And Barazoku was actually an officially published magazine that you could buy in stores. So it was very revolutionary for its time. It still kind of is. It's hard to find a Western equivalent for Barazoku because even stuff like Out Magazine doesn't really include all the stuff Barazoku does. It's a very, very well-established magazine, very good content. But going even further back to the Taisho era, which would be the early 20th century,
Yeah.
with the popularity of the Takarazuka Review, which is an all-female theater troupe, girls' fiction took off in Japan, especially those portraying lesbian relationships, inspired by the romantic overtures in Takarazuka performances. Because despite the fact that it was a male and female character, they were both played by women, and even the lives of the actresses themselves behind the scenes and the way their seniority was set up within the troupe fascinated fans, and people fantasized about the romantic entanglements they would all get into. Nobuko Toshiya, the woman with the lovely hat there, was one of the most prolific authors of lesbian fiction in that era, writing Class S stories that depicted forbidden romances between upper and underclassmen girls. She basically invented the Class S genre of Yuri, if you're ever familiar with that. Her works and continued presence of Takarazuka inspired what became the Yuri genre of manga and anime. And there were actually early depictions of trans people in manga in the 60s as well, mainly through subversive mangaka like Go Nagai, good old Top Go, and the Gekiga innovator Yoshihiro Tatsumi. And these are guys who will mostly learn about if you actually really study manga as an art form. I completely forgive you if you're not super familiar with either of those names, but if you actually really start to study manga, just the history of it and the foundations of it, and, you know, beyond Tezuka, they were two of the really major innovators of the genre back in the 60s. Go Nagai, if you're not familiar with his works, have you ever heard of Cutie Honey?
Devilman.
Devilman.
Yep.
Yeah.
Those are his works. Devilman in particular was very subversive for his time because the main characters are absolutely gay for each other. They're also really weird. And he does weird stuff with gender, and this particular example is from Makeup by Yoshihiro Tatsumi about a young trans woman who sneaks out of her home at night, goes to a bar, and gets into an entanglement with another woman who is fully accepting of who she is because, like, I'm okay with you because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm with a woman. And that was really revolutionary for the time. This book came out in the 1960s.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a big deal.
it was a big deal. This didn't even get officially republished until it got put into a Tatsumi collection that got re-released in the early 2000s. So that should give you an idea of how difficult it was to get stuff like this published. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Yaoi and Yuri, you know, the big ones, the ones you're probably most familiar with, at least in their manga form as we know today, were both invented by a group of shoujo manga artists and authors known as the Year 24 group. To give an example of a member of that group that most people are familiar with is a mangaka by the name of Ryoko Ikeda, who is the creator of Rose of Versailles, which I'm assuming some of you at least heard of, correct? Ends up for Rose of Versailles?
That was actually more people than I expected.
Well, look it up. It's crazy. And then read Onisama A, her other work, which is also crazy and gay. And Rose of Versailles is pretty gay too. Anyways, yaoi means yamanashi, ochinashi, iminashi, which means no peak, no fall, no meaning. To break that down, it essentially means they wanted their gay manga to get to the good stuff. So a lot of it was mainly about melodrama and sex. It still kind of is. We'll get more on that later. Yuri simply means lily and was coined in Barazoku to describe its lesbian reader base, because Barazoku is the Rose tribe, Lilizoku is the Lily tribe, and that's how they differentiated their male and female fans. And while we traditionally view BL as tending to be more explicit and BL as more romantic, the truth is they're mostly interchangeable these days and used by publishers to sell either or both. So the point of making distinctions at this point is really mostly a Western thing. In Japan, they don't make that distinction at all, because the fans of both are usually just adult straight women anyways. We'll get more on that later. Yuri, however, covers a much broader range of content and themes featuring lesbianism or lesbian characters as a central element. Gives a lot more creative freedom. We'll talk about that. One of the very first Yuri manga was Shiroi Heya no Futari by Ryoko Yamagishi. Who's another one of the year 24 innovators. You will learn about her if you study manga for any kind of length of time. The archetype is simple. A candy type is a petite, femme, innocent girl, whereas a rose is a taller, aggressive, masculine in behavior, not necessarily in appearance, and one is often attracted to or admiring the other. Homophobia is used for melodramatic effect, and the stories almost certainly end in tragedy, with the rose dying to protect the candy from scandal or harm. It is often surmised these lesbian panic endings weren't the intent of the authors, but instead pushed by conservative publishers at the time. Yamagishi Sensei has actually gone on record to say, yes, it was the publishers that changed the ending of Shiroi Heya no Futari. She wanted a happy ending for them. They said you can't do that in the 70s. That's a running theme in a lot of early stuff.
I mean, even to this day, you still have people that, in their works, they want to go further than they're allowed to do. They still have to operate within the framework of societal expectation and the rules of their publishers. So it's do this or don't have anything at all.
And you'll be hearing that a lot when we talk about modern stuff later. Well, Yuri continued to exist as a shoujo subgenre. That is very loud. Lesbianism in mainstream manga and anime was having a hard time. If it wasn't being treated as a huge joke, such as the wacky perverted girl, the disgusting older woman hitting on school kids, or done as pure fan service meant for male eyes, wacky perverted girl flipping skirts or grabbing chests. We talked about that in the exploitation section.
It still happens.
It's still a thing. It just didn't exist at all, if it wasn't those things. This started to change with Naoko Takeuchi's Sailor Moon. This was, at the time of its release, the first mainstream all-ages manga, that's important, all ages,
Yes.
manga to feature a lesbian couple that was neither perverse nor treated as a joke. Takeuchi has maintained that Sailor Moon is a manga for all girls, including queer girls. Sailor Moon was, it formed like childhood anime experiences for a lot of us, at least people in my generation. I'm starting to realize that generation is shrinking a bit.
Oh no, it's just circling back.
Which means you all need to go out and buy Sailor Moon merch.
Also
and-
cousins.
Calling them cousins in the dub. No one bought that.
That made it worse, guys.
Not even for a second. I think that's the point where you start to realize, I think they changed some things in this dub.
No, let's not talk about 4Kids.
Yeah.
Oh,
This
God.
was Deke. Deke
This was
Yes.
deep. This was in the early 90s.
Yeah, it was Deke, and Deke also did this with Card Captor Soccer, which was on
No, that was Nirvana.
That was also Deke. As Deke and Nirvana, of course.
No, they're both Canadian.
Yeah, they're both kind of the same company.
Canadians
I had to look that up.
But yeah, when it came out, like the idea of lesbianism not as some weird joke existing outside of its own subgenre was unheard of, and its success sort of proved a point that mainstream audiences wouldn't be turned off about this, so long as it's not the main character. That's a caveat you have to make. Sailor Moon wouldn't have been nearly successful if it weren't for the fact that Usagi ends up with a guy. That's just the truth.
Oh boy, the manga hints at things.
The anime does too. They
Yeah.
both do.
Oh man.
Anyways, Yuri's grown to become one of the most broad, all-encompassing genres in Japanese fiction. Since the criteria seems to just be featuring lesbianism as a central element, Yuri has spanned romance stories, adventure stories, action stories, sci-fi, horror, comedy. Yuri can be targeted at female audiences, male, or both. It can be explicit or not at all. Yuri is a very diverse genre. I'm bringing up how diverse it is because I'm going to have to counteract that later. by talking about yaoi. And if y'all are here to not hear me talk nonsense about yaoi, you come to the wrong man. Yaoi started out as a literary genre for the most part. It didn't exist as manga, it was as stories. It made the shift to manga with Keiko Takamiya, who is another person you will learn a lot about if you study manga. Or feminism in Japan, you will also learn about her. Kazetsuki no Uta. Like of Yamagishi, Takemiya's work was set a similar archetype pattern that most yaoi would follow thereafter. A feminine uke and a masculine seme. Those terms come from judo, by the way. The uke is the one that receives the hold, the seme is the one that applies the hold. Now, understanding that where those words come from, you can kind of figure out what they mean here.
We trust your smart people to put 2 and 2 together.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anyways, and it also revolved around melodrama and eventual tragedy. Once more, these story endings were not under authorial intent but pressure from publishers, and while Yamagishi-sensei was subtle with her hints that it was the publisher, Takamiya has straight up said the publishers fucked her over. I'm sorry.
We're 13 plus fan.
Are you any kids?
No.
Okay. Bless your feelings. Well, you're not a kid anymore.
Welcome to adulthood.
I don't even have to read this. I'll just say it from my heart. Yaoi has not evolved as a genre whatsoever. We'll talk about later that a certain success of a certain series that will be named later in the panel may be changing things for it because it shows that it can change and still be successful. But for the most part, yaoi has been comfortable to stay in its niche. The art tropes have remained the same, the relationship tropes have remained the same, the use of trauma and melodrama as story building remains the same. You can
pick up a yaoi manga that was published this year and one that was published in like the early 90s, and they look almost identical.
They read almost identical.
Exactly.
The stories are so similar. No one really wants to play with the dynamics of the genre.
And it's unfortunate.
And in large part is because it's not necessarily the creator's fault. It's because the audience demands it to be this way by rejecting anything that tries to be different.
Well, you're always going to have the same pool of audience and because usually it's like younger women who are really into it, and the pool of younger women keeps coming into it.
It's always been criticized
So why change it?
as sort of like this, this is just exploitation of gay male relationships for the consumption by straight women. Takamiya's defended it very heartily as a feminist expression of what she calls safe sexuality. We'll talk more about that later with another series because it kind of backs up what she was saying. And, there are arguments to be made for both. The debate's not going to be over anytime soon. It feels like it became stagnant because we do kind of have, despite the fact that this is considered subversive by containing queer characters, it's still kind of falling into the tallest blade of grass gets cut mentality that is a large part of Japanese culture, that difference stands out and therefore no one wants anything to do with it. And that's what happens when people try to break away from the traditions of the genre. It's depressing, but things could get better, and we'll talk about more about that later. Different from those is gay komi. While yaoi's depiction of male homosexuality largely intended and created by women, gay komi, a wasei eigo term for gay comics. Wasei eigo, if you're not familiar with Japanese, is a borrowed term from another language, specifically English in this case, that has a specific meaning in Japanese. So you can say gay comic, and it doesn't mean the specific thing that gay komi does. So it's a language thing. It's entirely made for and by gay men. The term is a bit broader than initially apparent, given that while a lot of gay stories are sexually explicit, the thematic elements therein may vary pretty widely. There's actually a gay komi that we're going to be talking about later in the panel that isn't sexually explicit at all.
And will make you cry.
It'll make you cry. The most popular gay komi published in the popular gay magazine G-Men. Barazoku obviously publishes a lot of itself, which is why one of the other names for this genre is Bara. We will not be using that term, and we'll explain in a bit. I'm not going to go out and shame anyone that is using it, because it is an established part of the Western family lexicon at this point. But it does mean a specific thing if you are going to use it, and it means this. It doesn't just mean buff dudes. A person cannot be a bara unless they are literally a rose.
Don't call someone that.
Yeah, don't call someone, because that's considered an insult in Japan. We'll get more into that
Yeah.
later. But bara and geikomi specifically refer to these kinds of comics. It's a specific term for a specific thing. It should not be generalized to mean various things. Gengoro Tagame is a name you should know if you're interested in geikomi at all.
And yes, we had to crop that bottom picture.
I mean, he's not naked,
But
but that fundoshi does not leave a lot to the imagination. Gengoro Tagame has had his works published internationally, exhibited in galleries, and is one of the most critically acclaimed and prolific gay erotica artists since Tom of Finland. If you don't know that name, I don't blame you. That's kind of an old reference for us old gays. But if you know who he is, you know. You know why I made that comparison.
I know I made that comparison to him forward.
Don't look up Tom of Finland paintings in public.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, if you don't know any other name in gay comics, you should very least know his. He is by far the most influential person in the gay comic genre today. But if you're looking for other artists, this is a book you could buy today. You might even find it in the dealer's room, who knows. Massive is an anthology of works and profiles of various gay comic artists, including Takeshi Matsu, Fumi Miyabi, Inuyoshi, Guy Mizuki, Jiraiya, Seizo Ebisubashi, thank you, and Kazuhide Ichikawa. If any of those names are familiar, I know Takeshi Matsu and Jiraiya are very popular. Jiraiya's arts is specifically the one being depicted here. He loves drawing big fluffy dudes. I love big fluffy dudes.
He had a signing in New York as well.
And so much of the New York bear community came out.
There were like people who were having things signed by him. They're like it's people that look like me, and they were crying. I'm like, oh my god,
Because I think
crying.
I think that, like the big part of the reason gay comic has hit so well in America is because queer media in America tends to portray gay men in a very specific set of ways. Either the very feminine or hyper-feminine camp gay, or the very clean-cut, white-collar gay. But the bear archetype, the type of gay I am, is not commonly portrayed, but this genre is all about that type of man. And it shows us and our relationships in a way we don't really get in our own country. And that's why, you had grown-ass men crying when they met Jiraiya because of how much his works mean to them. It's happened with Tagame too, especially with the manga we're going to be looking at earlier, or later.
Sorry, we were up for
It's a big emotional moment.
Yeah.
But you know how we were talking about Bara earlier, Tagame has some words to say about this. Was a interview with Gay Manga, which is a big part of the people that publish and expose Gay Manga. Massive was published by them under their publishing arm, which I think they have a publishing arm under Yin Press. I don't know.
Sure. But anyways,
it's not a word Japanese people use. The gays don't use it, and it's definitely a foreigner's term for us. He walked us through the term's many transmutations, his origins as a hetero slur, some to English pansy. He's being gentle. It's actually more similar to fat.
yeah, it's not a pretty word.
It's not a pretty word. It's radical reappropriation by the Japanese gay media in the 1960s and early 70s, evident in title magazines Bada and Badazoku. Its eventual expiration amidst the newly politicized discourse surrounding homosexuality in the 80s and 90s. So as gay people tried to get more civil rights in Japan, they just started eliminating the term as it was. It's kind of how, to make a good comparison, like queer has been reappropriated very well, because if you go to study, LGBT history in America, you're taking a queer studies program, or to study media or history of LGBT people media, you're taking a queer media studies. Because it's so academic now, that's a term a lot of LGBT people will use when lobbying for legal protections. Because it's a good umbrella term, it doesn't feel necessarily as limiting as, like, say, if you're a queer identity that doesn't necessarily fall under the L, the G, the B, or the T. Queer is a better umbrella term for that, and that's the reason it became so popular in academics, because it covers everything. And we sort of strayed, because, faggot was on its way to being a reappropriation. I'm sorry if that word bothers people. It bothers me
That's
too.
the
but
F word.
I do have to use it in this context to give it the full
Yeah.
context. That word was starting to be reappropriated in the 80s, and when the Human Rights Campaign decided to dial that back, they felt that that word was too strong and too firmly associated with the perverse side of gayness that they didn't want to really associate when they were trying to, lobby for equal rights. The same thing happened in Japan with the term bada. Now, badazoku still calls itself badazoku, but as far as a self-identifier, that really dropped in the 90s in Japan, and now it's considered more insulting again.
Yeah. Oops, sorry.
He says that the word has come back to life, and first I would have to say personally, I'm sort of against it. I don't call my own work bada, and I don't like being called bada, because it's a very negative word that comes with very bad connotations. And I very, very prefer the term gay manga or gay homie.
But his opinion is kind of evolved on it because finding a way to describe it specifically in the Western, like describing the comics themselves as bada. But not calling a person who has like a body type bada.
Because it's
Referring to the works, like if they're just referring to the works, like it's okay, I guess.
It just may be a little late for gay homie to catch on.
Yeah, that's basically what is he saying?
All right. Now this is where the panel gets very different. If you've been to this one before, instead of doing my usual breakfast that I do in the previous versions of the panels, we watched 4 anime. Well, I watched all of it. You guys came in parts. They were busy doing other things. Okay. He was working on a costume.
And I was just working.
Yeah. I finished it.
Wait, she still hasn't finished his contest costume.
Sorry.
You know we love you.
They love you. You can do it.
But I sat down and watched 4 anime and actually fully analyzed it to determine, we're talking about representation.
Mhm.
Giving you a list of recommendations does nothing. And it usually just ends up being stuff, well, this anime has a gay character in it. Go watch it. And that's not enough for some people.
Yeah.
And again, we're not saying that these series are necessarily good or bad.
Yeah. We're just gonna be
It's
analyzing
just-
them.
Huh,
These
I'm
are
not
the-
gonna say it's good.
Yeah.
These are the things that we notice, and this is our opinion, and that's kind of
Yeah.
But anyways,
the caveat to that.
the 4 anime we're going to be looking at is Izetta the Last Switch, Flip Flappers, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, and one you've probably never heard of. We'll get to it. Anyways, Izetta the Last Switch is set in an alternate history of Earth during a version of World War II.
It's World War II with the names filed off.
Yeah, with all the names filed off. All the country names have been changed. It's not, the Nazis. They're more like World War I style German state imperialists.
Yeah.
The Otto von Bismarck types, if you're familiar with history, like that version of Germany, even though it's set in the 40s, but 30s, sorry. Anyways, a series about a young ruler of a Switzerland ex-nation, Elstadt. Elstadt, is that?
Elstadt.
I'll take your word for it. Named Fine and her friend and savior in nation named Izetta. As the title alluded, Izetta is a witch who opts to use her power to save Fine's kingdom and stop the war, thus saving the world. That's the best summary of the plot I can give you without giving too many spoilers. So now we're going to talk about Does It Hold Up? The series has a lengthy investment in establishing the relationship and how and why they care about each other in a romantic way, and I really appreciate that. They don't just say, oh, these characters are just in love now because they met each other once and there were soccer pedals following. That kind of love at first sight is a thing, and sometimes it can be a good literary device, but oftentimes it's kind of a cop-out to not actually establish how these characters actually get to know each other and care about each other. And this series actually does a lot to do that. And the relationship doesn't feel exploitative at all. It doesn't feel like the relationship exists for a male audience at all. It just happens to be the relationship of the story. It's treated in the same way, a romance between a male and female characters would be, that it's just an element of the story. It's not there for you to gawk at. The cons is that there is some fan service in it, and it's fan service specifically of the non-consenting variety.
And there's the Oh,
I actually have two pictures of
Yeah.
this. One is a picture of the exact example.
I'm gonna come in here and grope your boobs, basically. It was really gross.
And the other one where she's
Like, I wanted to just, like, I walked out of the room. I was really uncomfortable with it.
chained up in a very sexual way.
And a lot of male gaze
while
fan
people are
service.
taking pictures of it. Well, it's really just those two instances.
Well, there's also the shower scenes and bath scenes and
No,
stuff.
that's general.
Yeah, it was just like, you just gotta be ready for it.
And while the story is good, it was engaging. I wanted to watch it till the end. It doesn't actually do much to reinforce the core relationship. You feel like they could be involved or not be involved, and nothing in this story would actually change. And that's not a good way to do a story that centralizes around the romantic relationship.
And-
There has to be stakes.
Yeah.
And while same-sex affection is hard to expect for the reasons we mentioned earlier, because publishers and studios don't want that, the series is very coy about it. That's this picture of them holding hands in the bed. That's about as explicit as it gets. They never even show them visibly kissing or even coming close to kiss. Like that, they're just touching foreheads. That's all that happens. And they rest on each other's shoulders. And while it's still you're very much meant to interpret this as a romantic relationship, it's subject to that same chastity that infects a lot of mainstream nerd.
Basically, if they had to make the argument to a publisher or
They're just friends.
some other sort of
They
entity,
if they have to make the
They're
just friends
just
argument, they can.
really close friends.
Yeah. Should we tell? No.
No, I don't want to spoil
Yeah.
anything. I just
Okay.
will say your expectations for a war story will be pleasantly subverted.
Yes.
And a lot of series do, Izetta doesn't. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because anything else would be a spoiler. But in a lot...
If you like war stories that happen to have a lesbian relationship, I would watch it.
It's a good start,
Yeah.
essentially.
But
like,
be
we
mindful.
could be doing a lot worse.
Yeah, be mindful of the predatory fan service.
And like we said, you could do a lot worse than this.
Yeah.
You could be watching Strike Witches.
Oh, God.
No,
So that's counter blessings.
No judgments, but slight
No, I'm
judgments.
judging. I'll judge your Strike Witches. That's gross. Flip Flappers is ostensibly a magical girl anime, a genre already famously lesbian friendly.
Okay,
Sailor Moon, most of the Toei Magical Girl series would play it up in some way. Pretty Cure does it. It's a genre that they feel safe doing this kind of content, and a large part of that is because lesbian experimentation, I guess you could call it, is considered safe and almost normal in grade school girls. So anything that shows stuff that is mainly targeted to grade school girls, like Magical Girl anime is, they're usually safer with that content. So the affection is a little more obvious in this series as a result. The main couple, Kokona and Papika, you'll get to hear those names a lot. Must regularly journey to a world called Pure Illusion, or Pure Illusion.
Pure illusion.
In order to obtain fragments in order to grant their truest wish. Flip Flappers has a lot going on beneath the surface.
It's very surreal.
It's very, very surreal. The animation is absolutely gorgeous, by the way. If you're just a fan of good animation,
Yeah.
you should watch this
This
show.
one kind of flew under the radar, unfortunately, but it's very, very good.
Well, it flew under the radar for a good reason, because it came out at the same time as another series.
Yeah, it's true. And by the way, all of these series that we're talking about are available on Crunchyroll.
Mhm.
And they're already out, but you don't even have to pay for Crunchyroll.
You can just marathon them all in one go, like I did, and I don't recommend doing it. Tackles topics of identity, id versus ego, coping with trauma. There is actually an episode very specifically about that is very difficult to watch, but I recommend you stick with it anyways, just because, it's sometimes good for you to watch stuff that's hard to watch, even if it's upsetting. And other deep psychological points belied by its colorful presentation. It is a very, very good anime. Like all points against it aside, I'm going to bring up later, I can't recommend Flip Flappers enough. It is very good. It kind of loses its way towards the end storyline-wise. It feels like it's distracted to the point that you didn't think was that important through the rest of the episodes, but without spoiling anything. But in the end, it's still very, very good. Visually, it never lets up on surrealism too, so that's really cool. The relationship is core to the story throughout most of the series, and the story does hinge on their relationship. There are stakes to it. First of all, they can't even enter the world of pure illusion unless they have a shared mutual bond of feeling. So they can't even go do the thing they need to do unless they're connected mentally in some way. And if that connection is damaged in some way, stuff gets messed up. And one episode, I can't remember what episode number it was, I wish I could remember, just because if you want to watch any episode, watch this episode. It's a horror-themed episode, but it's a horror theme about class S sentimentality and conventionality, where the horrors, they're constantly repeating, like Groundhog Day style, repeating a day at like a Taisho era style all-girls academy, doing things that are so common in these, like if you've ever, God, what's the best example? Is
Oh man.
Lady Maria's watching over us. I can't remember what his Japanese name is. Yeah, it's specifically making fun of that. And it's so great. It's so funny. And I'm not saying those are bad series, but
It's just
it lampoons him so well and does it like as horror. Like this is horror. This is scary. This is stupid. There is mild service, say, for one character introduced late in the series named Yu. That's her picture over there.
Right, yeah.
It's a bit leans into uncomfortably lolicon territory.
Yeah.
The good news is that there aren't a whole lot of lingering shots of her costume, and also, despite the fact that it sets her up to be important, she's not. That's one of the things
I think
she's off about this series.
I think she has less than half an hour of screen time total.
Yeah. It bugs me so much that all that hype for her debut, and she does nothing. Anyways, there's a predatory monster lesbian early on. That's her also pictured. She isn't around long. And the affection is a bit chess. Not as it wasn't in Zeta, there's a lot more of it. And they're also a lot more liberal with declaring their love for each other. And they're using Daisuke, which is a little bit, not as strong a declaration if you're familiar with Japanese terms of endearment and affection. But and Daisuke, isn't that strong, but the way it's used implies a lot of strength to it. So, namely that she just repeats it a lot.
A lot.
You'll get used to hearing their names. Thankfully, their voices are cute, so it's never really good at grading, but oof.
I don't know, Coconut gets a little shrill sometimes.
Anyways, I don't know if you've heard of this one. How many people don't know what Yuri on Ice is about?
I actually don't believe
Oh.
it. I've never watched
It's
it.
about ice skating!
I know that, but
No, that's what it's about! It's about ice skating!
Yep.
To the point that professional ice skaters have gotten obsessed with it and watched it, and then made the comment, "Who told?"
Johnny Weir was a guest at Crunchyroll Expo last weekend. That should tell you everything about
Loves the
series.
show.
Like, there's no oversimplifying it. It's a show about ice skating, and the main characters are gay.
It's competitive.
That is literally
Yeah.
all I need to say about it, because that's all there is.
Yeah, specifically competitive figure skating.
Competitive.
And in this case, simplicity is a wonderful, beautiful thing. The story is, the relationships are complex. The story is not. You get it. You're engaged. You know what the stakes are.
You get to enjoy the relationships because then you're not so mired down.
You're never getting lost on the plot.
Yeah.
And that's really a good point to make. The affection is very clear and deliberate. This is the series we were talking about earlier that we feel like the success of Yuri on Ice. It's everywhere. It's probably the most popular anime that came out that season. It is doing gangbusters on the home video market in Japan. It is a certified hit. It is probably the most popular anime since K-On!, which is saying a lot, because K-On! Set Blu-ray sales records, but Yuri on Ice is currently breaking. If that should tell you anything about how successful it is. And with the exception, and people complain about this all the time, there's a scene where Victor and Yuri kiss, where his arm is obscuring the actual contact. And there have been tons of thought pieces and discourse about how they were cowards for not actually showing the kiss. Like, if there's no kiss, it doesn't count.
Primetime TV.
All right.
To get a little more into that, like, what you can air at what time in Japan is very much kind of like how it is here in America, where like if you want to be able to show it to everybody, there are certain things you can and can't do. And they pushed it to the limit with this to be able to not be stuck at a 3 a.m. Saturday morning time slot. Like, the stuff they show at 3 a.m. is like panty and stocking with garter belt.
Or the next anime we're going to talk about is the 3 a.m. slot.
Yeah.
Versus like, if you want to show it on prime time, that's like One Piece or Gintama was like 6:30 on a Wednesday.
And this was pretty late in the primetime block.
It was like 11.
11 o'clock is
still-
still considered prime time in Japan. And they're not.
Because
you know,
most
they're
people
still
are out till
subject-
9 p.m. anyway.
They're still subject to those rules of essentially decency. And both the director, who you should absolutely follow her work, she did Michiko Hachichin, which was an amazing anime, and this was amazing too. And the creator, who has worked in the Josei manga world forever and has done a lot of queer stories, they have both gone on record to say they wanted to do more but couldn't. So
The idea
cut them
is,
some slack.
if we make this acceptable, then we can take the next step and make more things acceptable. If we're doing that slow
Like-
exposure.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine, to put this in Western terms, can you imagine Steven Universe getting away with what it has gotten away with so far in terms of displaying relationships between women if Core hadn't come first? Think about it. Would they have even wanted to try?
Yeah.
Or Adventure Time, even.
Yeah.
Like,
And even Adventure Time got in trouble for
Yeah.
that.
you've got to start pushing ground, even if you don't get everything you dreamed of, you will always get the stuff you work for. And
Somebody's been watching Little Witch Academia.
it's such a good line because it means a lot
Yeah.
here too. They're working towards bettering the depiction of same-sex relationships
And
and
normalizing it,
Yes.
normalizing it.
which is what we want.
And if they hadn't gone as far as they did, even if they couldn't go far as we wanted them to, that means the next series is going to be like, well, maybe we can.
Mm-hmm.
And that's super important. And like, it's very difficult to say anything actually bad about Yuri on Ice. It's not just based on unrealistic expectations of what they can do in mainstream Japanese anime.
Yeah.
With regards to same-sex relationships, because people will say all the time, like, well, anime is very sexual, you know, like there's fan service
Not for
everywhere.
us.
It's not. Stuff that's designed for a straight audience is very different for stuff that's designed for us.
Yeah.
And we're not getting our fair share of the pie yet. And this is as close as we've gotten in mainstream anime of getting something for us.
It's so
and
nice.
it's so nice to see. I'm getting clipped.
For us that everybody likes.
Yeah.
Like, there's
I think it's
fan
the really
service,
exciting.
but it's fan service of male bodies which don't have the same history of exploitation as female bodies
Yes.
do. So it doesn't feel the same. People can't make those unilateral comparisons because it's not the same. Culturally, it's not the same. The ending feels a bit rushed, but whatever. They didn't know it was going to be as popular as it was. They probably wanted 13 episodes, and one day the studio comes in and is like, actually, you're getting 12.
Like, crap.
But those are just stuff that comes with the industry. It comes hand in hand with being a mainstream anime in a primetime slot.
Most of the fan service focuses on one character too, the Swiss skater.
Well, there's a lot of Victor too. That's
Yeah.
Victor's butt.
Okay. It's really bad with Chris too.
Yeah.
It's really funny with him.
I don't even find them that attractive. I don't know. I don't dig his goatee. He's got a little. Here, where is he? Is he?
He's right there, the blonde.
Yeah, the blonde with the black undercut.
Point on the house.
Yeah, here. Move mouse over here. There he is.
That's him.
I don't find him that attractive.
There's a lot of fan service.
There's a lot of fans.
But you know what? There's a
Oh.
character for everybody.
Exactly.
And I kind of don't like the fact that they do the character of the day thing either, because you spend an episode getting to learn a skater.
You're gonna
You're
touch
probably
them.
never going to hear that skater say more than a handful of lines ever again, with the exception of JJ. Once he's introduced, you are hooked on JJ
He
stuff.
never shuts up like
He does a short program to a song written about him.
Still, the popularity of this, even with like what we have now, we'll probably get another season. So you may be getting to see those people
Yeah.
again. So let's
You never know. I really
And they
hope
set it up to continue
Yeah,
with the
they did.
ending. They're like, this isn't stopping. We're not getting off this train.
we are
till the
all
wheels
on
come
this
off."
money train.
Anyways, this is the last series we looked at. You've probably heard of it. It's very popular. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. It's based on the manga by the same name by that guy. Adapted by Kyoto Animation, Dragon Maid is about an adult woman named Kobayashi. Important to note that is an adult woman, so this isn't about schoolgirls, who, in a drunken stupor, accidentally invites Toru, a dragon, to live with her as her maid. Toru falls in love with Kobayashi, and the series revolves around her shenanigans living together, as well as some of Toru's fellow dragons and the humans they regularly inconvenience. It is a comedy. That is one of the best running gags in the series right there, is her constantly trying to get Kobayashi to eat her tail. They don't explain why she wants her to do that. It's just that she's constantly trying to do that. This is another series that by the end of it, I could say I genuinely did enjoy it, but it's very hard to recommend, and you'll see why. There is a huge Lolicon Shotacon warning on this. If that content makes you uncomfortable, there is a character literally named Shota. It's a little purple-haired kid right there. It gets really uncomfortable, and some of the fan service is just so goofy I can't take it seriously. It's mostly dumb comedy and not what I would necessarily call exploitative. It's just playing with anime tropes. But it is hard to recommend, but it's so good because the story of affection between a found family, Toru, Kobayashi, and the little one Kana, is precious and told so well. And by the ending, you're actually crying for them because they get to stay together in the end. Sorry, I spoiled it. But it's important you know it's okay in the end. And the relationship is very clear-cut, obvious affection. They are clearly meant to be a lesbian couple.
And this was from
That's
the Blu-ray.
from the
release.
Blu-ray collection of them getting married. Like, they want you very obviously to see it, but you feel like I'm never quite comfortable with the line between what was genuine and sincere and what was exploitation, and how they sort of do a balancing act between the two. And to Kyoto Animation's credit, they took 90% of the gross shit out of the manga. The manga is absolutely disgusting. Do not read it.
Yeah, I really avoid the manga.
It is terrible. I'm actually amazed it was pitched to be adapted to anime, but then I realized it was created by a person who had produced another manga that was also a hit anime, being I Can't Understand What My Husband Is Saying, which a lot of people found genuinely funny. But, I mean, if you've seen that, you know the dude's sense of humor leans very sexual, and sometimes in a not good way, in a very, very gross way. But unlike Yuri on Ice, which I can recommend without caveats, Dragon Maid, I'd have to look them dead in the eyes like, are you comfortable with jokes about lolicons?
How strong is your tolerance, essentially?
How strong is your tolerance for
I
anime
can't watch
bullshit?
this.
Yeah.
I can't watch it.
My tolerance, as someone who's watched anime for a long time, just rolls my eyes at this stuff now, was tested.
Yeah.
Like, I can watch a lot of stuff, but this was a little hard to get through, but by the end, I didn't regret it, so. Anyways. Going into the manga world, we're going to talk about Ototo no Oto, my brother's husband. Let's say that 3 times fast. No, right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, I kind of.
Yeah, we're out of here at 1:30.
Yeah, so you're an hour and a half in.
We don't have. I could not do this in an hour.
We tried once.
Yeah.
It did not go well.
Anyways, I want everyone in the audience right now to try to say Ototo no Oto 3 times fast.
No.
No.
Oh, God, no.
Thank you, some of you, for attending.
I speak some semblance of
we have
Japanese.
an hour and a half.
And no.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
we're
here
here
till
till
1:30.
It says outside till 1.
We're in till 1:30.
This,
Yeah, we're 12 to 1:30.
It says till 1 outside.
Our panel.
Our panel was told it was 12 to
All right,
1:30.
let me check.
Okay, thank you.
Not that one.
Anyway.
Don't test me. Anyway, that does what it is. What it says, right?
1:30.
Okay, we're here till
thank you.
1:30. Thank you.
I was gonna turn my time too. Thank you. I was
Um,
like, we signed up for an hour and a half. You're getting an hour and a half. You have to pry our ass out of this panel.
My brother's husband is by Gengaro Tagame, that legend we spoke of earlier. It is completely non-pornographic. It is for all ages. Really meant for families, manga. This is something for dads to read with their kids. Gay dads with their kids. It's about, and this is the part where you know it's going to jerk at your heartstrings. A single father discovering his estranged brother not only had passed away, but had a husband when he was living in Canada, who has come to live with him and his daughter. The story explores a lot about the difference between being gay in the West versus in Japan. It can be pretty heart-crushing in times, but a valuable read. It has been published in the US. Look for it in the dealer's room. Buy it. Read it. It is so good. I cried a lot. There's a lot of stuff in this manga that gets really real, really quick. One of the scenes is not one of the ones I'm going to be showing. Is the girl, one of her classmates, learns about the gay dad living at their home, and he comes to see them, and there's no dialogue in their scene because it's just the main character watching them talk on the veranda. And there's no dialogue, but as they talk, the kid, it seems, he just starts getting more and more emotional and crying. And in the end, they're hugging, and it's like,
It's the acceptance. That's a big deal. Like, this acceptance and it being published not as some kind of niche
Because,
thing, but it's just here.
this kid, he's a fictional kid, but it feels so real. He never had another male figure in his life tell him it was okay.
And obviously that hits home for a lot of us.
So it's hard to read, but it's so good. Oh God!
And then if you
Whoops.
you can talk about how important this is with other people and be able to do it in an informed and obviously emotional way, and that appeals to people.
And one of the big things this tackles is speaking with young people in plain terms about what homosexuality is. Because a lot of the questions we hear is, how am I going to explain this gay shit to my kids? All right?
Easily, in like 2
Easily.
minutes.
Just be honest about it. Just 2 scenes of it right here, and they just go over it so well. I'm going to be okay.
But this is really important. The fact it was published in the U.S. Just support the official release so we can get more of this
And
stuff.
it's gotten some major accolades. Like Anderson Cooper read this.
Yeah, he's got a blurb on the
And
book.
gave it his thumb up. He's got a blurb on the boob.
What is it with you and those kinds of slips, man?
Oh God.
Boom jacket.
Wow.
Oh God.
I'm glad I put makeup sealant on because otherwise it'd be.
And now we have like video of this for forever.
Yeah. Your boom jacket is forever.
You might want to edit that out.
Boob jackets and tears. That's why people come to this panel.
Oh man.
We're an educational panel of boob jackets. Anyways. The other one I want to highlight, which was also published in the U.S., you can go buy it right now.
Hopefully, we're gonna look for these in the dealership ourselves.
Because I want to actually.
If not, at the
copy
very
both.
least, Amazon and
Yeah,
just
Amazon definitely has them.
My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness is a autobiographical manga by Kabi Nagata, and her experiences struggling with depression, sexuality, identity, and other topics. Another difficult but very relatable read. If you're gay and have been depressed,
Yeah.
if you've gone through depression in life, this is also a very relatable read because a lot of it is her struggling to get out of her depression and get out of the funk in her life. It also gives a lot of insight on how lesbianism for adult women is regarded in Japan because, she's 28 in this manga.
and that's a huge deal because again, there's some weird mentality still that like
You need to be married and have
you
kids.
stop being gay
Yeah.
as a woman once you're like an adult.
Once you're out of high school, I think, is when it tends to stop being
And
acceptable.
Nagata, in particular, explains her experiences confronting sexuality when she was growing up in very awkward ways, and namely through yaoi. You know how we were talking about that earlier, about how Takamiya called it a safe sexual experience for young women?
Ta-da!
That's exactly what happened to Nagata. She tells such a relatable story about how she started to come to terms with her own gayness by watching the fictional gayness of other men, or at least come to terms with the fact that she didn't think the same way other straight women did. Of course, on the other side of the coin, she also tells about her eyes kept being filled with input from creative works, but actually correct information about what homosexuality is, or how sexuality even works, or how even romance is supposed to work.
This is a problem in Western society as well. Because, man,
It just takes on an extra awkward flavor in Japan where romance is still a lot of times not a thing. You're getting married for financial reasons or for family expectation or...
Yeah,
traditions are great.
because as she
Yeah.
says, it wasn't a lack of information that was the problem. It was a lack of correct information. And that even goes back to what I said about Ototo no Oto. A lot of the young gay kids in Japan don't really have a resource, at least within their local townships and everything, about how to figure this shit out.
Yeah. It's not easy for anybody.
It's not easy for anybody. I mean, the internet has made it a lot easier.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of incorrect information on the internet. Pardon me for a second, I'm going to be a little critical of Tumblr.
The end.
Tumblr is a good social media website, especially for sharing images. It's not so great for sharing ideas. And this is not a fault of the culture on Tumblr. It's necessarily a fault of how the website is designed. It creates echo chambers because it's essentially share and note based. So you will basically only ever really be subject to opinions that are similar to your own because you just flat out never exposed to ones that are disagreeing with you. And usually the people that disagree with you are stupid and can't word their arguments properly. So you never really get an actual confrontation with information, and misinformation spreads very, very quickly on Tumblr, as I'm sure some of you might have noticed.
And places like Twitter too, my god.
Twitter's bad for it too. Twitter's especially awful for it because 140 characters or less is not enough to give someone an actual education about what it's like to be gay in America.
Hold on, here's an evergreen tweet. Twitter is not the place to be having this debate.
And Facebook's not good for it anymore because they're no longer timeline based. You're only going to see content on your timeline that you've actually liked periodically.
So essentially, social media is tricky in general for this
Social
kind
media
of
has made
information.
this conversation so difficult because a lot of the blogging is done on social media, and it's made it harder to get correct information. And this manga touches on that. Like, she goes on the internet and she finds nothing useful. So, it's an interesting read. I'm going to talk about some trans manga now. Now, these are definitely from the last one presentation. I just want to touch on them a little bit more.
Because boy, getting actual trans manga is difficult. The
I think
stories aren't being published.
I think only one of these is published in the US that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think so.
No, wait, Ayasu was published in the US.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Not all of it was.
Yeah.
And I think you can only get it from like, I don't know.
Anyway.
It's a manga by Chiyo Rokuhana and focuses on the lives of three characters, Hiromi, Ryoma, and Haru. All three characters were born intersexed. Hence the title of the series. It is a very complicated drama that once again very frankly discusses the struggles faced by intersex individuals regardless of their gender identities. IS isn't as difficult as a read as I expected it to be. They do touch on hard subjects, but a lot of it is just coming to terms with how you form a gender identity as an intersex person, because an intersex person is faced with a very difficult conundrum because physiologically you can be either.
And they usually face unwanted medical decisions at the beginning of their lives.
Yeah, like at the beginning of your lives, usually those decisions are made for them, and that's very terrible to do. Thankfully, this book is largely about people discovering their own identities. I think one of the characters had the surgery with her baby.
They had the genital normalization, as they like to call it. It's awful.
I can't remember. It was one of them or all three of them. The others two just don't talk about it. I don't remember, but it's a big. It just explores a lot about what gender means in Japan too, which I think is an interesting. Like, if you want to look at how queer media develops in Japan, you have to understand Japanese perspectives on gender because it means a lot. I mean, it means a lot to us too, but.
Yeah. That's the thing about analyzing this kind of stuff, is you have to look at it from a different perspective, because Western views are very different from Japanese views, just because that's just how the culture is, and you gotta take it into account.
Japan, the gender binary is a lot more rigid. A lot of modern queer culture in Japan is very gender queer, I guess you could use that term, where the binary doesn't mean nearly as much or anything at all to some people.
Because the way they're looking at it is, well, we're already outside of the binary, so we may as well just do whatever we want.
And science backs that up. Like, the binary is nonsense. It's entirely societal, so we have a lot easier time getting away from that. In Japan, it's not as easy. In their society, the gender binary is so much more strictly enforced. And it can be difficult, and this manga provided some great perspectives on that. Wandering Sun is another manga about trans characters. This one was actually published in the US. I think it's out of print, but you can probably find back copies of it somewhere. Amazon.
Half Price Books is also good for hunting those down if you're patient.
Yeah.
Takako Shimura. Modern Sun is about the struggles with gender identity faced by two protagonists, Shuichi Nitori and Yoshino Takatsuki. They are both trans. One is a trans girl, one is a trans boy. Once again, the series is a pretty honest depiction of the lives of trans youth in Japan. It can be a bit hard to read at times. It comes highly recommended by this panel. It has been adapted into an anime available to watch on Crunchyroll. I'm not sure if that's still true or not, so I'm going to have to check that for me. Double House by Namine Haruno is about Maho, a trans woman, and her roommate Fujiko as they deal with expectations and flaws of gender culture in their adult lives. Unlike the other series, the protagonist of Double House is very much a grown woman and offers a unique perspective on the life of a trans person in Japan as an adult. This is another one that deals a lot with gender roles and expectations. Fujiko is struggling very much against that very, very strict gender binary we talked about earlier, the expectations of her as a basically a rich girl, and in Japan, and the traditions associated with noble houses that are still very much there.
But yes,
Arranged marriage is still a thing in Japan.
Wandering Sun is available on Crunchyroll.
Oh, good. The Hanayomi no Wamadadanshi, which I think means the bride was
The Bride was a Man or something.
the bride was a man or something like that. It's honored by bride from London by trans manga Kachi. She was very famous in the doujin world for a long time. This manga was essentially her coming out party because a lot of people didn't know she was trans. It's a peculiar look at the daily struggles of a trans woman in Japan from a decidedly more lighthearted perspective. It's very comedic and very cute. A lot of it's mostly about finding clothes that fit you. As the title suggests, the manga culminates in she marrying her supportive boyfriend, so that's a very, very happy ending.
It's very cute.
It's super cute. And she even explains a few bits about just queer culture in general in Japan. Like she has an explanation about the rainbow flag. I mean, we know what the rainbow flag means, but not everyone might know. So it's a good read. And that concludes.
We have
enjoyed the panel.
We actually have a decent amount of
We had 22 minutes.
20 minutes
for
for
questions.
questions.
This is
and
exciting.
answers, and I'm sure you guys have to
duck
put
out
together.
for a second. Yeah, sorry. Let me duck out for a second. I'm drinking a lot of water.
All right. So show throw the hands up. Somebody generate a question. Because we can just sit here and stare at each other all day.
Yes.
Do you have an absolute favorite in manga or anime?
As far as like queer stuff goes.
As far as
It's hard. Manga-wise, Ototo no Oto by Manos, my brother's husband. Nothing has touched me the way that manga has. Like, it had a deep, like, powerful meaning to me as a person. And I really wish that manga had existed when I was younger. And I really hope some younger fans find it, male, female, trans, non-binary, whatever, find its message about acceptance and conversation powerful enough, to be more okay with themselves. Because that's a big struggle for queer kids, is just learning to be okay with yourself, because we still live in a society that tells them it's not.
I'm very bad at picking favorites, so no, I do not.
Yeah, sure.
What about the worst one?
Some of the crap I watched to study exploitation. No. Worst was Horizon in the Middle of Nowhere. It was absolute dog shit garbage. It's not even a good anime.
So that's like the extra insult. I'm more like certain moments or certain characters that really grind my gears. Like, that's a worse thing for me when otherwise the show is really fun and really cute, but then you have this one character that feels like it just kind of ruins the whole moment for me. So like, I really like Show by Rock, but they had that one moment.
I would get more into Show by Rock if the main girl's art designs didn't. I don't know. There's something about it that triggers something uncomfortable to me.
And
I guess because
that's the tricky
Yeah.
arena with Show by Rock. So I really like that show, but it's
I'm fine with their animal forms. They're cute. Then.
Sanrio form.
Their Sanrio toy form. Let's see. And it wasn't necessarily bad, but Beyond the New World was very frustrating. I just ended up not enjoying my time watching it.
Was that Yoon Kono one?
No.
No,
The
that was a
Yoon
different
Koga
one.
one was just bad. Beyond the New World was the one where they had like the compulsory homosexual relationships.
Yeah.
And
I had like blanked that out of
that
my
anime,
memory.
the anime and the manga it's based on are very much a criticism about how queer youth is treated in Japan and how it's expected. That's called a phase that they have to grow out of, and they take it in a very literal route.
It's
in,
just
Beyond
not
the New World.
very well done.
And it's just stuff about the plot that made me mad. It's just stuff that was just stupid. It wasn't necessarily offensive, it was just stupid.
So they tried. It just didn't
And
go
that
right.
used to be on our rec list because I felt like, well, it does serve the valuable purposes as criticism of gay youth culture, but
We've
it's
moved
not
on,
easy.
obviously, because
It's
now
not
we can
easy.
talk about Yuri on Ice.
anything you have to slog through to get to the message is probably not worth your time to watch. If you're not immediately engaged by it, you're not going to be engaged 12 episodes later either. And they're good.
So,
Yeah.
among all the anime that you mentioned, which, your personal opinion, which one do you think is like the best?
Yuri on Ice.
You're in. I thought you were there.
Beyond the shadow of a doubt. Yuri on Ice, and like between the four of them, Yuri on Ice is the one you must watch. Flip Flappers is the one I say you should watch. Flip Flappers unfortunately just got overlooked because it came out in the same season as Yuri on Ice, and it was never going to compete in terms of popularity. But Yuri on Ice was just enjoyable start to finish. Flip Flappers has some problems, but as far as anime goes, the animation is jaw-droppingly gorgeous in parts. And a lot of it was just done using old school cell techniques, just done in a digital format. So like the way characters move and the way the environment, like there's a moment where they're in the vacuum world, and there's this part where they do some, what do you call that type of panic, where it's multiple things moving in different directions? Parallax. There's a bit of parallax in it. And I'm sitting there, it's something as simple as a parallax, but it was so gorgeous. I'm just sitting there staring at it. And the ending theme is really catchy. It'll get stuck in your head. Flip, flop, flip, flop.
I was going to ask you, where would you like the future of the genre to go?
Yuri on Ice
What would
says
you like to see? You know,
more stuff like Yuri on Ice.
Yeah.
Stuff about normal, maybe not necessarily normal people, but first of all, normalization of queerness to the point where your main characters can be have that romance and then not be regarded as the extreme part of your show. No, the extreme part of Yuri on Ice is the ice skating.
Yeah.
Because everybody's doing multiple quads in their routines,
Like,
and they're
it's no
treating that
big
like it's
deal.
nothing.
Yeah.
It's a little unrealistic.
There is a, oh man, there's something really upsetting about Yuri on Ice though.
Just good direction.
Anxiety.
Oh yeah, Yuri on Ice also does a lot with anxiety. That's
Like
really
actual,
hard to
like
get
real
through.
depictions of anxiety. If you've dealt with it, you'll feel it.
But like Jesus, like there's like good direction is really what it needs. You need directors that have visions that they're willing to see through.
More diverse stories.
Yes,
Yeah.
emphasis on like other experiences,
Yeah.
but it's something being experienced by a queer person.
Yeah.
Like the cool thing about the four series we looked at is each was in a different genre: a war anime, a skating anime, a comedy, like basically a slice of life comedy, and a magical girl series that deals with freaking psychology as its core theme.
Mhm.
Like this is stuff, man. It's consumable stuff.
Yeah, like and like I'd like to see more trans stories explored, but that's because it's so rare to see it explored.
Maybe some more stuff with people who are like more adults versus
Yeah.
like young people. Like it's important that
Right.
young people are getting to accept that it's okay, but
As it stands right now,
That's the other thing that's important in Wandering Sun. There's actually a trans woman character who acts as a mentor, and she's successful, and she has a normal life, and that's really important.
for trans manga, it just really needs to get out of the josei subgenre.
Yeah.
so basically just not be stuck with certain tropes.
Yeah.
Or like a lot of trans stories you're going to see are either going to be sorted into gekiga, which are dramatic manga, mangas strictly for adults, or that usually tell very cinematic stories and usually only one shots, or josei stories like Double House is considered a josei manga, So was IS. They both ran in Josei magazines. You know, that's the kind of stuff I feel like it just needs to get.
It needs to expand.
The
its
broader
horizon.
audience.
It needs
Yeah.
to, like, there needs to be more risks taken, and I understand it's very difficult to do in Japan because stuff that takes risks tends to be rejected, and therefore it fails, and therefore no one wants to take risks again.
Mhm.
But, you know, Yuri on Ice is taking a lot of risks, and it's the most successful anime. At this point, it's going to be one of the most successful short-form animes in history.
Yeah.
And I think also you have this extra success because now they almost have to consider the international market.
Mhm.
Like they're being forced to realize that we are a monetary force to, you know,
That's-
work in their favor if you know how to work with us and
Yeah.
what our expectations are.
Especially with the rise of simulcasts. Let me tell you, as an older anime fan, simulcasts still blow my mind.
Yes, simulcasts are a
The
blessing.
whole idea of just watching streaming anime, like, I don't have to
This
download anything. I don't have to buy a tape from a shady dude in the back of a magazine.
I don't have to hope it arrives, and then there's like C+ quality, and there's like a scan line in the middle of it.
I don't have to bribe someone that speaks Japanese to sit with me and explain it like those earpieces you get for operas.
I don't have to go to Suncoast to go to the same section to keep the pornos in and awkwardly stand there picking through what might be there. The same 5 anime
And
every
then I
store
grab the dub
there.
tape instead of the sub tape.
Oh.
But yeah, it's just like the anime market is evolving, thankfully, because it has to appeal to a broader audience now. Because the international market is a big moneymaker.
So,
Or that they can take more risks because it's not just we have to appeal to Japan.
Exactly.
We can appeal to
Yeah.
Westerners.
So that's really where we want this to go. Just
the other side of the sword, though, is that the lessons from Yuri on Ice they could take might just be the shitty ones.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't necessarily say prettier animation would be a bad thing, or going back to rotoscoping. Okay, so
yeah, the
here's another cool thing they did in Yuri on Ice that has nothing to do with queerness, but I thought was really cool, is that a lot of the skating routines are rotoscoped from an actual skater. You don't see rotoscoping in digital animation anymore because you can just path a 3D model to base it off of. Rotoscoping, of course, you have to do based on actual film of a real person moving.
It looks
Rotoscoping is what put Disney on the map with Snow White, because Snow White was a real actress being filmed doing all that, and they animated over her oceans using a rotoscoping device. It's also what Ralph Bakshi made his money
So that's
on.
why it looks so pretty and smooth,
Like,
is because
it's
it's
such
film
a-
of a real person.
Yeah, it's such an old animation technique, but it's one that if that could come back, that would be really cool.
Hopefully they get the gay stories are
The
okay
other
to
message
tell.
too.
Yeah. Both, please.
Any other questions? We talked a lot about anime,
Yeah.
but it was more of a generalized discussion, so it's not helpful. You could have that at any panel.
We do like that you chose our soapbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys actually have been a great crowd.
Yeah.
Give yourselves a round of applause.
Yeah, we're very appreciative of our audience. We couldn't do this without an audience, obviously. We always love it when these people stop in, and we always love it when people tell us that. Like, we've had people tell us how much this panel means to them, and that's why we keep doing it.
And I'm glad the new version of it streamlined a lot faster, so we
Yeah.
can get to this Q&A session.
Yeah, because we like talking with people too. We like answering your questions what we can, because this is
No one has any.
we're passionate about this kind of stuff.
Yes.
Okay. I heard Netflix is going to be throwing a lot of money at locally U.S. produced anime in teaming with Japanese producers.
Okay, so what Netflix is wanting to do is they're wanting to basically do what a lot of other publishers and Western publishers have been doing in Japan, and that's basically you get a studio in Japan. The best example is Warner Brothers with David Studio, who did the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime. David Studio is based in Japan. Warner Brothers is a Western publisher publishing their anime or shopping that anime out to other people like Viz and negotiating television contracts for them because that's where the money is.
They're also handling it backwards with Ruby.
Yeah.
And they're doing it, retroactively with Ruby. But
That's Sidonia or something.
Knights of Sidonia. They did it with Knights of Sidonia. They did it with. They're doing it with Little Witch Academia.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to see Fate Apocrypha on there, which is the same case. Netflix established itself basically as the publisher. They did they didn't do any of the animation, they'll call it a Netflix original production, but I
Basically,
promise you
it's-
that is a misnomer.
Here's money to make the thing.
Yeah, but
Please
here's
make
money
the thing.
To make the thing, so we can put it on our network and charge people for
But we
it.
have no idea what they're gonna do as far as.
Netflix, however, has
Kind of.
got a terrible way of doing it though, because Netflix's whole spiel or their whole ordeal, the whole way they do things is binge watching format. So they only release seasons at a time instead of doing simulcasts. And what this causes as an unfortunate result
Piracy.
is more people are just pirating the anime.
Because I know
Because
a lot
they
of
want to
people
watch
watch
it
it
when it
live.
comes out. Because we've been spoiled to Funimation and Crunchyroll and all those services, and Hulu even,
Yep.
doing simulcasting. And Netflix isn't doing that, and that's stupid.
I'm hoping that Netflix gets up to speed with that.
Netflix has shopped out studios to do, you can't call them in-house productions, but at least do productions specifically for Netflix though. That's what Castlevania
Yeah.
was. And they do want to do more shows like that, but that's just because they want exclusive rights to it.
Yeah.
So even in Japan, you can only watch Castlevania on
On
Netflix.
So, in effect, they're not really gonna try and control the content or introduce any new content that might be more palatable to.
Probably
Western
not.
audiences.
Well, I mean, Castlevania was picked because it's something American audiences are very familiar with. But Castlevania's always been more popular in the West.
The
than it was in
only thing
Japan.
I can think about stuff getting tweaked is that like they did back the production of the Seven Deadly Sins anime, and that toned down a lot of stuff that was in the manga that would make it watchable for me. Like,
Yeah.
And in that case, just taking out some of the crappy fan service, fine, whatever, you can have it.
But I don't know if they.
but as far as like trying to change a queer narrative
Yeah.
or introduce more stuff like that, that's tricky to say. Like
Yeah.
they have had shows that have been
Yeah.
good about broaching some of those
And
subjects.
Netflix has a whole category dedicated to queer media,
So-
so I don't think they would do that.
I just don't think they're gonna. I don't think they're gonna.
I don't think they're going to be
I
trying
don't
to
think they're
be
gonna-
groundbreakers.
Yeah,
or anything.
Yeah,
because
they're,
they're
they're
still
not going to
working-
seek it out.
They're still working with Japanese companies, which they're still gonna be.
They still have to think it's going to make them money and
Yeah.
that someone's going to want to produce it,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
The company that's their production studio has to decide it's worth the risk to waste to spend their time and resources
Yeah.
on.
And a lot of this more subversive stuff you're seeing is usually coming out of smaller studio
Yeah.
houses. The studio that produces Yuri on Ice, it feels weird to call them a small studio because the work they produce is stellar. Really only has 2 hits to their name, Yuri on Ice and the anime adaptation of Shingeki no Bahamut. That's it!
Also-
They've done other series, but those are the only 2
The
hits.
Flip Flappers animation studio. That was their first one.
That was their first.
3 megahertz was their first.
3 megahertz didn't exist before Flip Flappers.
Yes, that was their only one. That's.
So in like a lot of ways, the smaller business sometimes is more willing to take the risk because they don't have a reputation to
Yeah.
uphold. It's not, oh, well, this isn't something that we would expect from the studio.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, you're not going to see like major stuff coming out of like the big name studios like Puro or Toei or even David Production or Kyoto Animation will do some of it, but Kyoto Animation has kind of had a history of doing whatever the hell they wanted
And getting away with it.
and
Yeah.
getting away with it because they made K-On! They can do it. When you've made an anime that prints money like that, you can do whatever you want.
Okay, I think we got time for
They
one
did
more
have
question.
some really precious queer characters in some of
Oh,
their
they
shows.
did, yeah.
Sorry, I'm like a huge proponent of Tomoko Market.
Tomoko Market would not exist if Kyoto, if K-On!
K-On!
had not
happened first.
done
I-
Game
so-
Masters.
Yes.
That is my soapbox.
And Tomoko Market-
I love Tomoko Market.
It is very cute, and it
Which-
actually has
that's
a.
another example of a great female director, Naoko Yamada.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who does amazing stuff.
There's actually a trans woman character in Tomoko Market who you don't know is trans, and so she has to be voiced by Daisuke Ono.
And a man in the English version as well.
Yeah. She's like, oh.
But one of the main girls is like she has she really really cares about the main character and really wants to be in a relationship with her, but is kind of scared because
Yeah.
of the whole societal expectation thing.
I'm also just scared of rejection. Man, it doesn't matter.
Oh, Midori.
Oh.
Okay, we have.
Sorry.
Yeah, good. We got time for like
One more
maybe
question.
1 or 2 more questions.
I think just one.
Maybe just 1, depending on the question. Someone ask us a good one.
Otherwise, I'm gonna keep talking about Tomoko
Make it a real juicy one. Just a fat, thick question. I'm sorry.
No, control yourself.
I heard it on.
Never mind, I'll
Okay.
keep my mouth shut.
Oh, we can always end a little early. That's
We can
okay.
always end early.
Yep. Oh, okay, no more questions? Thank you so much for coming in. We have our social media here. Do we have our cards? I've left our cards.
I don't know.
The cards are in a bag that are in a bag that's in the room. Okay, but ours are social media. We are SoCause TX across social media, Facebook, Twitter. We do have a Ko-fi account if you wish to directly support us financially in any
You don't
way.
have to, but
You
we
do
just
not
think
have to,
there.
obviously, but if you would like to see more of this content produced and make it easier for us to produce this content, because yes, all this does cost money.
And for us to just be able to spread it to more
Yes.
conventions. That's the
Yes,
really big one
it's-
for
it's-
us, is we're
yeah.
students and working people and
Yeah.
Coffee.com is basically a website where you go and buy an artist a copy. It's basically just give them a small donation. And that's if you want to. You don't have to. But if you just want to follow us on social media, we are on Facebook, we are on Twitter. We're a lot more active on Twitter than we are on Facebook, just because Facebook is stupid.
Yeah, we.
If I do more than one post a day, nobody's going to see either of them.
Yep.
Oh, and
And if you have questions that you weren't comfortable asking the general
you
audience,
can come up
at
and
least
ask
one of us will be hanging around for a little bit outside. You can more than welcome to come talk to us.